Okay.
Are you going to introduce me?
Oh, someone's kind of good timing. That's a good word.
Well, introduce
Yeah, I'll say
me.
that. I'll come over here just for the introduction. Okay, kia ora koutou, welcome, and this is part of the Global Education Research Seminar Series. This is the fourth in the series, and Chris North is going to be presenting some work on sustainability, which is also part of this current PhD work, I understand, right, Chris?
Yes.
So, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Judy. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tūtoko te mahoma, ko opa waho te awa, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko Otautahi te kainga, ko Chris North ahu. So I just wanted to start off with a short mihi, and the reason that I've chosen to use a mihi is well, there's multiple reasons. Through the College of Education and through my work, I'm really interested in culturally responsive pedagogies, and introducing yourself in a way that people from other cultures, in particular Māori, can really understand is helpful in creating that environment. It's not easy for me at times because I feel like I am concerned that if I just take these aspects of Māori culture and just plonk them down in my own lessons or in my own practice, that can be viewed as appropriation, where I just take something, insert it, and consider it to be done. However, having had good discussions with some colleagues and within the Māori department, I felt really supported and encouraged to include a mihi in my talk today. The other aspect of mihi is it tells people my place and my context. And that's the focus of the talk today, is to look a little bit at place, my place and your place, and how connections to place can be helpful in developing environmental and cultural sustainability. So let's look at my mihi in a little more detail. This is Tūtoko, and that's me on the left at the bottom there. I was there, that was part of a climb that I did in the 1990s. I ascended the Kaipo Wall, and as part of that, I've also ascended almost to the summit of Tūtoko. Tūtoko for me is a really special mountain. It's nestled in the heart of Fiordland National Park, and for me, I got close to the summit and I chose to turn back because I didn't want to step onto the summit. And that was the first time for me that I felt that level of, I guess, respect for a mountain that I considered not going to the summit. So Tūtoko is really important for me, and that's why I've chosen it as my mountain, or my maunga. Opuaho, or the Heathcote, runs through my neighbourhood. And we've done some family adventures there, and I feel a strong connection with the Opuaho, or the Heathcote, and I'm concerned about water quality issues there, and it is my neighbourhood. So I've chosen that as my awa, or river. My parents are split. My mum is Swiss, my dad's ancestry came from England. That's my cultural heritage. And I've been, I guess my family's been in New Zealand for a few generations, so I really feel like a New Zealander. And Otautahi, or Christchurch, is where I live. So mihi in place. A traditional mihi connects people strongly with the land, with the mountains, with their ancestors. They're all intertwined and interconnected. before you talk on a marae or in many settings, it's expected that you say where you've come from and what your place is, so people can contextualise and understand what you're going to say. My mihi is disjointed. My mountain comes from Fiordland. My river from my neighbourhood. My parents come from overseas. I've travelled frequently around the world, most of my childhood around New Zealand, and in my adulthood around various continents, in fact. And I found it a bit of a challenge doing a mihi. I felt like maybe it wasn't appropriate for me to have a mihi because these things aren't actually connected for me. They're all over the show. And I started to think a bit more deeply about that. And I felt that there was something important within that I wanted to explore. And that's what I want to do today. I want to contextualise how mobile society can relate to place. And why has that got anything to do with sustainability at all? So Bowers wrote this in 2001, and the thing that struck me about it was that social justice and environmental justice are so intertwined in all sorts of different ways. Poor areas of cities, of nations, tend to have more degraded environments, tend to be the places where rubbish dumps and toxic chemicals and nuclear waste are put. Not so much in the leafy suburbs. And so these issues of social justice are tied in really closely with environmental aspects. So I want to talk a little bit about environmental ethics now, just briefly. There's different kinds of ethics. I'm not really seeing the top of that, are we? Okay, so first up, my page. Responsible global citizenship means that we have to take care of social aspects and environmental aspects. And I guess I am going to focus a little bit more on environmental aspects in this talk. I want to explore the contribution that place-based approaches make, but also cosmopolitan approaches. And then I want to offer a brief case study, including a soundbite, of freedom camping in New Zealand, because I think that sheds some really interesting light on this discussion. First up, environmental ethics. There's two types of ethics. There's normative ethics. So normative ethics state that there is a more correct or a better thing to do in any given situation. Whereas descriptive ethics is like just whatever's going on. There's no judgment. It's just an interpretation of what's going on. And I'd like to frame this discussion in normative ethics, where there are things that we can do that are more appropriate and more responsive to environmental situations or issues. And an influential writer on place-based approaches is Sobel, and he wrote that having a connection with a place or some kind of emotional attachment of some sort is a precursor, is a requirement for us to feel, for environmental ethics, for us to actually take acts of care, engage in acts of care with the environment. So place-based education arose in response to the idea that a lot of the things we're experiencing are really abstract, and in particular in schools. We'd talk about deforestation in the Amazon basin, We'd talk about the chemistry of climate change. We'd talk about all of these concepts and ideas, but it was abstract. It was kind of out there somewhere remote. And argument that place-based educators bring is that these things are not helpful. And that there is a placeless and deterritorialised population that floats around and never really is grounded in any place and never really connects. They travel from one identical shopping mall experience or takeaway experience to the next, always seeking that similarity and that sameness that gives them comfort. These can be called deterritorialised people as well. They have no place, no Tūranga Wairoi. And place seeks to address this, fosters an engagement and connection with specific location. So real people and real places coming together and making some emotional attachment or connection. The problem is people like myself. I travel widely. I sometimes stay, the longest I've ever stayed in one place is 7 years. And that's not an unusual situation in today's society. There are many people who travel frequently. And does that make a problem? Does that create a problem for place-based approaches? So this is about concerns with too much focus on place. If we as educators get really into place and the specifics, there's been some critique of that. Heiser in 2008 felt that local places were as unfamiliar to many people as these abstract global concepts. Thomas Schell reckoned there was no such thing as a local environmental problem. Whatever's going on in that particular location, time and place is also going on elsewhere in many other places. So there's kind of structures in place that mean that these, say, let's take an environmental issue, that a toxic chemical being deposited in a landfill, that's a localised situation there, but it's actually going on in many different places, and it's kind of a response or created through the structures that are much more than specific to any one particular location. The idea is also there's some concern that place-based responses or approaches may obscure connections beyond this one location and create this kind of short-sightedness. I'm caring for my neighbourhood. I'll get onto that a little bit more. And finally, there's kind of an othering that can go on within the place-based discourse. So we're here in this place. Who are these other people coming in here? What are they doing? And we see that sometimes in the freedom camping discussion. We'll get onto that later. So cosmopolitan approaches. I guess the Nazi Germany was a fairly influential moment in the last century. And that sense of nationalism, that fierce pride in place, in nationhood, created so much strife. And cosmopolitanism, or cosmopolitan approaches, kind of arose out of that and sought to bridge bridge across from different areas. So emphasising more transnational or global approaches, and Olympicism is one of those, bringing people from diverse communities together, exchanges, international exchanges. And Gustafsson, a Swedish researcher, studied Swedes and where they travelled. And he found that people who worked around their neighbourhood were really strongly attached to their neighbourhood and cared deeply about what went on there, or more deeply. Swedes who travelled more widely for their work tended to see themselves as more citizens of a wider area. For example, if they worked in France and Eastern Europe and other places, they would be concerned about what was going on in those places as well as their own neighbourhood. And he concluded that actually it's a matter of how far, your place connections are determined by how mobile you are. It's not necessarily that people who are more mobile have no connections to any place, but rather their boundaries are blurred and they tend to take a wider purview. But there's also some concerns with cosmopolitan approaches. Tourism. You travel briefly, those bus tours that go around Europe in 7 days and you see 8 capitals or something like that, allow a little more than for you to take a photo outside through the bus window. What kind of experience do you have of that place other than a fairly superficial visual insight? And there's been that critique also within Aotearoa New Zealand that tourists who come here, they'll travel, an average tourist stays 21 days. And in that time, they generally want to see the whole country. And so that doesn't actually allow much time for sitting in one location and getting to know people and hanging out. Generally, it's like hightail it to the next site and move on. And the view through the windscreen of the window could resemble kind of a theatre of landscapes going past you. So just some scenery that moves on without really understanding this place or what it is, other than, I guess, a romantic ideal. Wilderness landscapes. That's what people come here for. They can see that, they can tick that box. If we want to reach people who are so mobile and so fast, environmental education, their attention span isn't necessarily that great. And environmental education needs to almost be reduced to a very concise message. This is what we want you to do. You've got it moving on because you're just on your way through. And the critique of that is it's just a slogan. I've done a lot of work with Leave No Trace, and that has been critiqued as, well, leave no trace, that's not right, can't do it, it's just a slogan, what does it mean? Well, it is just a slogan. If that's all you hear, it's not going to change behaviour in any way, shape or form. It's just this nice phrase. And as such, you just become too generalised and abstract. So now I've just critiqued place-based approaches, and I've critiqued cosmopolitan approaches. And I guess that's not a really helpful place for us to be, having just kind of broken them down. This talk is grounded in an article that I wrote for the Australian Journal of Environmental Education. And I found some interesting quotes that said, people often set up arguments at, extreme perspectives to create discussion and arguments. And I've been responsible or guilty of that to this point. And I feel like it's not actually helpful to continue with that, because the reality is that, or the middle ground is kind of the interesting place. It's a place of tension, it's a place where things are contested, and it's a place where people can come together and learn from each other. And it's not an easy place because people will have quite different perspectives. And I want to look, there we go, I've got a meeting. Now. That's great. Should I snooze? Yes. It's great. Yes. Chris, you've got a meeting. Okay. Let's see if this is going to work. Okay. So, So what happens when a place attached person meets a, I don't know, this is the word that I came across, cosmopolite. And I'm not quite sure how to say that. And so there's a couple that I met, and they're Germans, and they were touring the country in a camper van. These are the Freedom camper vans, and if you look into the back here, you can see they've got a sink, and they've got a stove, and a chili bin, and they've got everything, all the inputs. They've got options for all the inputs, but none of the outputs. There's no toileting facilities on board, nothing like that. So they're faced with a conundrum, and that's quite an interesting situation. This one particular couple chose to camp by toilets, and that often meant they were camping illegally in places where you're not supposed to camp. But they chose to do that because they thought it was ethically better. Okay, and I've got a little soundbite here, and I'm hoping that we can hear that. It's about 1 minute long, and I'd like you to think about place-based versus cosmopolitan approaches as you listen to it.
Sally Quickfall takes me back to Lygar Bay, where I've been earlier in the day. Most camper vans have left, but we meet a young Swiss couple cooking dinner and setting up for the night. They too get the message to pack up. They're understanding, but tell me they've just had a run-in with some locals after they scraped some vegetable leftovers into the bush.
I just put some organic pumpkin in the trees, and they didn't agree because it smells bad. So, and I don't want to put some food in the rubbish because they burn them, so it's a waste of energy. So maybe you should put a compost or something, not only rubbish but compost too.
So you're saying that you can put some of this in the bush and it's okay?
Yeah, that's exactly what I did 10 minutes